Hey everyone, welcome to this week's release of the Hash Rate Happy Hour podcast. On today's show, I'm joined by Tim Echols, the Vice Chairman of the Georgia Public Service Commission. And my goodness, was this an absolutely phenomenal discussion today. We talk about the balancing act of setting electrical rates in the state of Georgia, how Bitcoin mining is helping with consuming the excess power that's being generated by rooftop solar, and a complete walkthrough of how you can start to get in touch with the folks in your state for having a discussion about power rates. This conversation was fantastic and a brand new perspective outside of the world of Bitcoin mining, and Tim shares how he and the state of Georgia are excited about the benefits of such a large, flexible load like Bitcoin mining. Today's podcast is brought to you by our sponsor, the Texas Blockchain Council, a Bitcoin-first, nonprofit industry organization working to make Texas the jurisdiction of choice for Bitcoin mining and blockchain innovation. They will be hosting North America's premier policy conference for Bitcoin and the digital asset ecosystem on November 15th through the 17th in Fort Worth, Texas. For more information, please visit their website at texasblockchaincouncil.org. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Like I said in the introduction, I have the Vice Chairman of Georgia Public Service Commission, Tim Echols. Tim, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. And yeah, Georgia Public Service Commission, that's a mouthful.
Yeah, I think we'll probably stick to PSC for the remainder of the conversation. And then I'll let the rest of my coffee kick in during the rest of the conversation too. It's
I've got mine
it's bright and early. Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Well, Tim, I am ecstatic to get into this discussion today. My show is a little bit biased towards Bitcoin mining when it comes to energy consumption. And what's going to be fun about today's discussion is I think you're bringing a very fresh perspective and probably a more normal perspective, honestly, when it comes to large power consumption, power generation, things like that. Given that, would you mind giving me and the listeners a walk through your background and what led you to being the vice chair of the PSC?
Most folks probably don't even know that there's an agency in their state or territory that regulates energy. They're fairly obscure. They're called public utility commissions or corporation commissions or public service commissions. And, there was a time in our country where the rural areas really didn't have mail service. They didn't have phone service. And these public service entities were created really to take an entity that was granted a territorial monopoly. We still have a number of phone companies in Georgia that have a territorial monopoly for landlines. And so we have authority over them to make sure they don't take advantage or gouge the public. Utilities, electric companies, gas companies were the same way. Things really developed in cities, and then the rural areas got them later, 10 years, 20 years later. And so we've kept these agencies intact in all of these states. They've been given different things to regulate. So some of them regulate transportation. Think of moving companies. Think of charter buses, limousines, just a potluck of things that wind up on the table of commissions. And Georgia's had that with our PSC. Give and take, we've regulated trucks before. We don't anymore. We've regulated buses. We don't anymore. So the agency regulates the big utilities, gas, electric, and telecom.
I appreciate that. And I believe you said it, but maybe to summarize, that is all to protect the citizens' interest and the rate structure and just making sure that, like you said, some of those more or less monopolies don't get out of control to gouge the citizens in Georgia.
Yeah. And insurance companies are regulated by the insurance commissioner. So it's a very similar concept. And the public have to have some kind of recourse, right? If somebody's got a monopoly, you've got to have some way to be able to control that. And if ratepayers aren't happy with the way that we regulate the utility, they can fire us. They can go to the ballot box and say, we don't want you to do that role anymore. So I'm always cognizant of the fact that I serve at their pleasure. I better listen to them. I better be accessible to them. I better respond to their emails. I better be out there, speaking, at Rotary clubs or schools or whatever. So I'm on the go all the time, really being out there in the public.
Yeah, and you've been vice chair for, remind me how long, it's been a long time, right? You've been in this role, or at least with the PSC for some time now.
Yeah, I love the role of vice chair. We just elected another chair, and I understand from him that I'm going to continue in the role of vice chair. It'll be 8 years. So I often tease and say it's half the credit with none of the responsibility. So I love being the vice chair.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, and so you mentioned you're all over the state. You also have a clean energy road show. Maybe touch on that, and what is that?
I started this about 13 years ago. There wasn't but a couple of electric cars then, but I was driving a natural gas Honda Civic back then. And I just felt like, people need to know how these things operate. I knew that EVs were going to become a thing. And I felt like, man, I've got to have the experience. We would never elect an ag commissioner that wasn't a farmer, and energy commissioners should know something about energy. So I love experimenting with all of this. I have solar on the house that I'm in right now. I had solar thermal on the house that I had in 2010 when I was elected. So I love trying the technology because technology, especially when it's developing, it's not perfect, and it's good to kind of pioneer it and understand how it works so you can advise people, no, an EV probably won't work for you. You only have one car. You better just stick with something that can get you to your mother's house in Florida. So I love just experimenting with it and being able to advise people.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, it's a little bit like what I'm trying to do with this show myself. So I can appreciate that. A little bit of a different topic, but sort of similar in theme. So Tim, I want to kind of back up to just kind of go a little, another layer deeper on the PSC and what you guys do. Maybe walk us through what goes into that balancing act, and then maybe keeping the focus on like the electrical rate side of things, because that's what I like to kind of dive into on this show. Can you maybe touch on like what goes into that balancing act?
Yeah, energy regulation is pretty geographic sensitive, right? So we don't have any oil wells in Georgia, any coal mines, any natural gas. So we import, all of that. So the importation of it factors in. And then if you're in the Northwest, you've got big rivers like the Columbia River, the Snake River. The dams on those things are huge. The drop in the elevation, and they have a lot of power from hydro. That snowmelt from Canada coming down is huge. If you're in Kansas or Oklahoma, you've got all of this wind power out there. We don't really have the wind power here. The South is kind of becoming the battery belt. There's so many electric vehicle factories and suppliers, and now battery companies like LG and SK. So this is kind of exciting for us to have something that's kind of ours. And then energy regulations is pretty politically sensitive too, right? In California, people out there, they want a certain thing. They value things, and that's their privilege to do that. And they elect people who value those things. So they don't like fossil fuels in California. In Georgia, we don't really have a problem with fossil fuels. We're not at war with it. And so I love the fact that energy regulation in America is very federalistic. States control it. So I'm not telling California what they should do, and I certainly don't want them telling me what I should do. And that's why I'm kind of pushed back against any kind of federal control, strong federal policies, because it would kind of violate the geographic and the political nature of what we do.
Yeah, I completely agree. I appreciate that as well. And it sounds a little bit, Tim, like maybe the fuel source is then what is kind of ultimately dictating and trickling down into the rate that an end customer would see. Is that correct then?
Well, you've got the fuel component, right? And the power companies in Georgia don't profit off of the fuel. It's a pass-through charge. You've got all the O&M, any operations and maintenance that you're doing, that's being factored in. So if you've got old plants and you're having to upgrade, ratepayers are paying that. If you're building new plants, like we're building, 2 new nuclear reactors, well, that's going to impact rates a total of about 12% when it's all said and done. So as regulations change, power companies, think of them as compliance companies that happen to generate electricity because they very much care about compliance. And they're not activists. They're not rebels. They want to follow the rules. And so they're going to spend money to follow the rules. So if Congress changes something and says there's going to be a tax on carbon, power companies are going to comply. They're going to close fossil plants, or they're going to pay the penalty. Power companies, really are multifaceted, and a power bill, has a lot of different components into it.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Power bills, they're you almost need to take some time to learn how to break down and digest a power bill. And I understand. And once you do, you start to understand why all those different line items are in there. And it's not because they're trying to hide things or mask things. It's just their way of breaking out, like you said, operations and management, upgrades, transmission and distribution costs, things like that. Let me give you an example.
I was on Tybee Island last week. That's Savannah's beach, if you've ever been to Savannah. There's a guy down there that bought Sandra Bullock's house. She had a house down there. And he was advised by a solar company from another state to do a Tesla solar roof. There's only been about 3 of those done in Georgia. Tesla's great at manufacturing cars, but the rollout on their solar roofs hasn't been that great.
A little clunky.
Yeah, a little clunky. Yeah. And our power company and rules created by my agency only allow a customer to have 10 kilowatts of solar and be able to sell any back. If they're over 10, they can't sell back. So we want the arrays somewhat small. I mean, 10 kilowatts is still a lot. I mean, I only have 2 kilowatts on this house. It's got 8 panels. So I could have 40 panels and it would practically power my whole house. Well, so he's got 27 kilowatts of solar on this house.
Oh my gosh.
And he has geothermal HVAC. So the HVAC units, he has 2 of them. They're not running off the, off of his, traditional power. They're being powered, with water wells in the ground. So he's got all of this excess power. And so we were down there brainstorming. He plays disc golf and I play disc golf. And so there's a disc golf course. We were, playing disc golf together and just kind of brainstorming. And I said to him, look, since the house is owned by your LLC, you could do some mining in your garage. Your LLC could do that. We could treat this then as a business, and then you would be eligible to sell back if you were on a commercial rate. And he said, I've been thinking about maybe getting into that. That's a good idea. So he's got all of this excess power during the daytime.
Wow.
And given that mining centers are flexible, he could do, some boutique work right there in his garage. And so now he's looking at that and having his LLC do that. This guy's an entrepreneur, and if anybody could do it, he could do it.
Oh, that's fantastic. So you beat me to it, because my next question was going to be, what if there was something that could soak up half or a little bit more than half that power and because then he would have that 10 kilowatts that he could sell back. Oh, that's incredible. That's very cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he's got a Tesla there as well, but he does have all of this power. And right now, the rule is it goes back to the power company. He gets $0. I mean, he doesn't get a single penny. So he might as well soak it up doing some mining. And he's got other ventures that he's done. So he's not afraid. And so I'm keeping my fingers crossed that he's gonna do that.
Yeah. Oh, that would be such a cool like case study to be able to see how that all interacts and how that all works. So maybe what is the reason then that you can't be over 10 kilowatts? So why couldn't he divert his house's production? Is it just too much of a balancing act for the local power generator then, or what's the reasoning behind not being able to sell that back?
It's the distribution grid, and if everybody on that street, on that circuit had 27 kW that they were pushing back, it'd be a lot of upgrades that would have to be done. So I mean 10 kilowatts is a reasonable amount of power, and so we had to set it at something. I mean, we could raise it to 11 or 12 or whatever, but most people doing rooftop solar, they're doing 6, 7, 8. They're not doing more than 10. I mean, most people don't have a house as big as Sandra Bullock's house on Tybee Island.
That's right. Yeah, and I think you said you can have up to almost like 30 panels out there, and that's a lot. I mean, that's a lot of solar array to have out there. So I mean, I guess that makes sense from that standpoint, just like the footprint that you would need to be able to generate that. But then, yeah, one of the things I've been very curious about is the balancing act of rooftop solar and distribution for power companies in the grid system, and that's a tricky business.
When you are considering solar, and this is why we've done so much in fields. We have millions upon millions upon millions of solar panels in fields in Georgia. If you do rooftop, you've got to consider the direction of your roof, the age of your roof, the tree cover that you've got, your neighborhood association. So in order to get solar here on this house, I had to do the drawing to the homeowners association. I had to assure them it's going to be on the back and that no one could see it from the street. And then, the credit of the person, and then the lien, right, that they put on the house. Mm-hmm. So if you finance these things, you have some lien on your house, and if you sell it, you get to the closing table and you got to settle that, right? You got to pay that. And most of the time you're not going to get dollar for dollar what you invested in it. I mean, it's like a swimming pool. You put the pool in and spend $20,000, you may get $4 additional $1,000 out of it at closing, but it's not like doing a kitchen or doing a bathroom on a house.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been interesting. The rooftop solar has been interesting for a lot of reasons. Yeah. So I am curious again. I'm going to kind of stick on the PSC theme here. I am curious. This is very unrelated to solar, by the way. So this is a clunky transition to my next question. What does the process look like if a large customer or the power generator wants to establish a new rate? What does that process look like? And maybe walk us through like how someone can establish a new rate in Georgia.
Yeah, let's say that mining centers wanted to establish a new rate. We set and create new rate structures every 3 years. So one, it has to be by the calendar. So 2019, 2022, 2025, and the power company is already working on the 2025 rate. So one, mining centers, like anyone else, like restaurants, like anyone else, needs to have a lobbyist, needs to have an organized effort with their, quote, members in order to make something work. If just some kind of lone wolf comes in there with an idea, they're not going to get it done. It's got to require cooperation. and it's got to require advanced planning. So
Okay.
let's say that mining centers came to us, this summer, next year, and said, we're interested in a tariff structure that would allow this amount, with maybe a time of use piece on it. I don't know exactly how they might do that, but because they're interruptible, maybe they're getting some special consideration for that interruptibility.
Yep.
And that if they're asked to interrupt, and they would never be asked to interrupt at night. Let's say that maybe the mining center folks said, look, if we will be interruptible from 2 to 7 p.m., from June until September in consideration for X amount. So one thing's for sure, if they don't ask for it, they'll never get it.
Yeah, that's right.
You've got to come and make a case for it. So you would pitch it to the power company, then you would pitch it to each of the commissioners, you'd pitch it to our staff, and then you hope that it gets embedded in the plan. Then it's non-controversial. Then it's the power company saying, our mining center friends have come and they've said this and they need that and we like this idea and we want to propose this. That's going to pass. No problem. If they waited until 2025 and then they were hoping to amend the plan or get some commissioner to go to the mat for them, that's harder. So it's always better to think ahead, and it's always better to work collaboratively.
We'll be right back after this message from our sponsor. Support for this episode comes from SunnySide Digital. Are you ready for the next Bitcoin bull run? Get ahead of the game by building out your Bitcoin mining infrastructure now. SunnySide Digital is your one-stop shop for everything Bitcoin mining, from transformers and switchgear to racks and miners. With a white glove approach to understanding your needs, they'll provide you with the hardware you need at the most competitive pricing possible. Say goodbye to your sourcing headaches and say hello to SunnySide Digital. Contact their sales team today at sunnysideinc.ca or via email at sales@sunnysideinc.ca. All right, now back to the show. I appreciate that so much, and I appreciate you tailoring it to like a mining facility or some of these large publicly traded mining companies that are out there that do think longer term, think into the future, and can definitely appreciate that type of planning process. You're leading kind of nicely into the next, set of topics that I was curious about, which is flexible loads on the grid system. And so you mentioned something that would be really attractive and probably help these mining facilities, get into a new rate or a new, tariff would be the flexibility. Why? Walk me through what the benefits of the flexibility on the grid are. Why is that so appealing and attractive, and why would that help a new rate go through?
We are really moving quickly, into a pseudo microgrid environment in the power world, and it's been accelerated by the Southern Company purchasing a company called Power Secure up in the Research Triangle in North Carolina. And I think the reason this is so attractive to the utilities is if they're involved with the placement of these, quote, microgrids, and that can be a Volvo diesel generator, it could be a solar array, it could be a hydrogen fuel cell, it could be a wind turbine, behind a facility. But if they can be involved with it and an algorithm can be involved in operating it, then they can tap it. And if you can collectively tap every Walmart and every Publix and every Target, in the state of Georgia at 4:00 on a hot July day for 15 minutes or for 30 minutes, then you relieve that pressure on the grid. And that might keep you from having to secure another gas contract or build another whatever. And so it really just makes the grid more efficient, plus providing 100% backup for a Walmart or a Publix who may not otherwise had 100% backup. I mean, you think about a data center they have to have 100% backup.
Yeah.
And so you got 100 megawatt data center, you got 100 megawatts of generators out there, maybe gas, maybe diesel, whatever. So you're not going to be able to, no, you're probably not going to be able to interrupt them at all. But if they were really comfortable with their gensets back there, you could say to them, look, our algorithm's going to turn on all your 100 megawatts of natural gas generators this afternoon at 4. You won't even see a blink because then we've got batteries tied there as well to keep any blink from happening. I don't think data centers would sign up for this, but a Walmart and a Publix will because they can afford the blink for a second where a data center can't. So I just think you're going to see more and more of the big box stores and others working with the power company to create small microgrids behind their facilities that we can tap into and use to provide greater grid reliability.
Sure. Yeah, that's very exciting. I think, Bitcoin mining also steps in a big way because they can operate at that 100 megawatt capacity. I think actually down in Texas, there's like 1.2 to 1.5 gigawatts of just Bitcoin mining on the grid system that can actually curtail and then provide that power. So they can step in a big way where, maybe the Walmarts and the Publix, don't necessarily need to, or maybe they don't need to as aggressively. Yeah, it's interesting.
It's really the concept of aggregation, and the Germans perfected this after they created their energy transition law in 2000. They really started adding a lot of solar, and this was kind of exacerbated by Fukushima closing their nuclear plants, some of them, and now all of them. And then they were just building wind and solar everywhere, particularly wind, and they weren't, and by their own admission, they weren't really discriminating in the site selection. So they were putting wind turbines down in a valley. Well, that's not a good idea. You need it up on that. On that. So they went back with this aggregation law. They got stricter on their siting, and they went back and they created these aggregation companies that used a box on let's say my solar or my wind turbine or and they were working with the distributed generators to finely tune that grid. And just as the Germans do in about anything that they put their hand to, they make it efficient. And they've made their grid very efficient. They were even for a while tapping hospital generators, aggregating hospital generators. And I don't think they do that anymore, but they looked at everything, anything out there on that distribution grid generating power. We want to control when and how it operates and have our hand in that pie.
Sure. And the nuclear, it's been interesting to watch them kind of unwind and decommission the nuclear. And then kind of in contrast to that, Georgia, I think you guys first build out of new nuclear in 35, almost 40 years.
Yeah, 35 years. I mean, it hasn't been easy. I mean, being a pioneer is expensive, and we weren't supposed to be the pioneer. There were 15 states that were looking at building the Westinghouse reactor, but Fukushima just caused everybody to have heartburn, except Georgia and South Carolina, and then the Toshiba bankruptcy of Westinghouse just sealed the deal. South Carolina got out, and it was just us left. And I just felt like, man, we're $5 billion into this. We're going to need this power. I'm just going to have to, hold my nose and just suffer through this. And hopefully once we get this done, we'll do the ribbon cutting late next week on unit 3. hopefully ratepayers, see the wisdom long term in building these reactors.
I'm so fascinated by nuclear. I had a chance to actually interview a gentleman who works for a nuclear lab. He's a technologist for a nuclear lab, and he does all of the testing for the reactors to make sure that there's no chemical reaction that is, bad. And that's my very limited knowledge on the subject, but it's fascinating. That type of generation source. Is there? So I guess let me ask you: do you see a need for some type of an off-taker that's a flexible load being co-located at a nuclear facility? Is that something that you see as a benefit?
I think the excess power on any power plant at night provides some special opportunity. We do have extra generation, and just because we're keeping coal plants doesn't mean that we're running them full bore all the time every day. Really, the way I view it, we've got certain coal units, entire coal units that maybe 500 megawatts that are just sitting there, quote, as a generator, right? In case we have
up.
to have it. But I think from a mining center perspective, the geographic location is very important, because if you're on a congested circuit, you find a piece of land and it's on a congested circuit, and it's going to require a lot of upgrades or some additional, mammoth substation expense, it may be out of the money from the beginning. So I think there is some wisdom to looking at counties and cities maybe where they used to have a manufacturing plant there that's gone, and all the switch gear is still sitting there. All the lines are there tied to the grid, and then you basically fill a need that once was there. So you got some widget manufacturing plant that now's in China or Mexico, and this county is hurting because the business is gone, and in come the mining center guys with an opportunity to place at that facility a load that was equivalent or more than that factory, bringing needed money and efficiency to that grid. I think that's the kind of situation that to me is ideal.
I couldn't agree with you more. and maybe if you could just touch on your perspective of the narrative. So Bitcoin mining gets, a little bit of dirt thrown at it for using so much electricity, but what you just said outlines a pretty important thing. It's a small community that had a big manufacturer there that went bankrupt or outsourced to China, and now it's missing that revenue, that tax revenue, all the jobs, everything that used to be there is now gone. The power is still in place. Maybe what's your take on the narrative that you might see out there that Bitcoin uses too much electricity?
Let me just take you to Pasadena, California. I was out there recently planning a big trip for Georgia officials called Come See the Future of EVs. I was out there planning the trip. I was in Pasadena, and the city electric company has a gas plant there. And the managers of this electric car parking lot that they've created there, they have about 40 DC fast chargers there. And you think about the load of 40 fast chargers, probably 10 megawatts of power.
It's a lot.
It's on the gas plant property. I mean, they got plenty of power. And Pasadena officials were telling me that they've lost some load. And in order this is to me very creative. In order to get more load, they have priced that electricity at that charging facility at only 15 cents a kW, where Californians are normally paying at an EV charger 49 cents. So,
oh my gosh.
So they have people, because these are fast chargers, they have people from the region, maybe who work in this area, or who before they go home, they stop and charge in Pasadena because it's cheaper to charge there than it is at home. So Pasadena has created this loss leader almost situation for EVs that is, supplanting the other utilities. I mean, it's very clever what they've done. In that one parking lot per month, they do 20,000 EV charging sessions per month. That's a lot of EV charging, and it's really helped their financing. And in the same way with mining centers, if you think about a city or county, a utility that's already built out the capacity in a certain area, and now they're not using that. Well, that is actually causing grid inefficiency, and it's actually causing everybody's bills to go up slightly. So if you can inject something into that system that uses that power, you are helping the utility be more efficient, the grid more efficient, and you're benefiting all the customers that's on that grid, especially if there's some flexibility, the interruptibility or using the power overnight. And mining centers have the flexibility and they use power overnight. So I think people just aren't used to thinking down in the weeds on this. And, and of course, this is all I do every day is live in the world. And I recognize that, there's great benefit to it.
Yeah, I appreciate that a lot because I think, the common narrative as well, that power can be used somewhere else. And that's not always the case. Electricity doesn't just pick up and relocate like that. So I think it's really important that, that type of a narrative is being talked about and people are having those discussions.
Let me give you another example.
Please.
LAX Airport. I was out at Zeem Solutions. They're kind of on the backside of LAX. They do fleet charging for, shuttle vans and for Hertz rental car. I was at their facility and they had some ABB fast chargers in cardboard boxes, about 20 of them stuck in one of their facilities. And I said, why aren't you installing these and using it? And they said, power company doesn't have the power. It's going to take them a year to get us the power. So there are places where there is tremendous constraint on the grid. And frankly, it's bad for business. And in Georgia, we don't ever want to have to tell anybody, sorry, can't come here, don't have the power, go to Alabama, go to South Carolina. And so that's why we always have to be thinking ahead. That's why we have to look in a crystal ball. That's why we want to know where the sites are, right? When a mining center comes to Georgia economic development, to be able to say, hey, go down to Hawkinsville, Georgia. There's a factory right down there that, used to use, 10 megawatts. This would be a good place for you to locate. Plus, you've already got the zoning issues, right? I mean, I love reusing industrial sites because people are used to having industry there. It's not like you're bringing it into some greenfield, where people are going, hey, what's that? What's that noise? Why are those there? Why is that fence there? There's a lot of beauty in just reusing an industrial site.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think it's just the revitalization of those types of assets and those types of locations. And I think that that's a really good thing. And I'm excited to see more of it happening. I'm excited that you're already pretty plugged into that type of a scenario where Bitcoin mining can step in a pretty big and impactful way. I have to ask, Tim, when would you say the first time you heard about Bitcoin mining was? Or is it still something that is starting to hit your radar, or are you pretty tuned into it by now?
Our commissioner conference, which we have, for all the commissioners in the country, had a special session by Scott Madden Consulting about 2 years ago in San Diego, where we had a session on, Bitcoin mining and how it, might impact the grid. So, that wasn't the first time, but that was the first deep dive that I took with that. And in fact, just today, after this recording, I'm doing a Zoom about cryptocurrency mining with
wow.
Brian from Scott Madden, and talking about the impact that it's having on the grid. And we've also got Jonathan Smoke, who is the economist for Cox Automotive, talking about EVs and their impact on the grid. So we're really looking at these two, cryptocurrency mining or Bitcoin mining and EVs, and how that's going to change grid deployment, grid future. So I am still learning a lot about it, but I now, after having talked to enough people, I now understand what their power needs are, and I'm prepared to help them in any way that I can.
That's incredible to hear. And it sounds like for the most part, it's pretty positive discussion. Would that be accurate to say that so far it's been pretty positive and seems like a net benefit?
Most people out there have no idea what it is. And
that's true.
And they're not really necessarily riding through industrial parks. They're not, they don't, I mean, we have so many shipping containers in Georgia with our port. They see them all day, every day, coming up and down our highway, sitting around. I just think that people aren't that tuned in. I do think it's important. I mean, for me, I want data centers in Georgia, and I want mining centers in Georgia, because they are important customers. I want our grid to grow. I'm not interested in keeping a flat grid. I'm not interested in reducing electricity usage. I want more, because with more comes more opportunity, more prosperity for our state. We are really tied in Georgia to economic development in such a big way.
It's very exciting to hear all of that. So I, just to kind of keep a pulse on the time, I am curious, do you have maybe a suggestion for somebody, let's just say in the state of Minnesota, who wants to maybe tap into something like this, or reach out to, the Tim Echols of Minnesota or North Dakota, South Dakota, up in the Midwest? Is there a good starting point for someone? Is that just do a little bit of digging to find out who that right person is to start having these discussions?
I always recommend that with, your officials, whether they're elected or appointed, that you build a relationship with them, just like you did with me, right? We reached out, you reached out to me, we had a conversation. You have to begin somewhere. And you shouldn't wait until an emergency to start your relationship with an elected official. You should take them to lunch. You should, go visit them in their office. Invite them to your business. There's nothing wrong with that. And do it when you don't have a crisis. Give them a tour of your facility. Help them understand how it works. Tell them your story. And, politicians, they're people. They love human stories. They love to connect and build affinity and understand. They don't want to be out there making comments sounding stupid or ignorant. So, by spending time with them and helping them understand your business and your world, you're really helping them. And I think you'll find them open to that. And then once you've got the relationship, you can feel them out on, hey, how would you feel about a special rate for us? And how would you feel about lining up a lunch and learn to help us kind of see weaknesses on the grid, where we shouldn't be pursuing locations and where we should, and meeting with the economic development people, and where are the factories that were here that aren't there anymore? I mean, these people have an inventory of this stuff. There's no need for the mining center people to reinvent the wheel here. Tap into the resources that you already have.
That's so powerful and helpful. I appreciate that. And one of the things I like to do for my guests is make sure that, if you want to leave, a handoff for the audience so that they can get in touch with you. And we mentioned it at the top, but maybe you can go into it a little bit more. You have your own podcast, and you do a road show as well. So maybe how can people get in touch with you, Tim, and your show and your podcast and all that?
Yeah, anywhere you get your podcast, just search Energy Matters with Commissioner Echols. It needs to be all of that. There's a number of Energy Matters things out there, and we'll push that out to you if you like every week. We've done 232 episodes, 600 guests, any and everything that you might want to know about energy, you're going to learn. And we have a really fun time. We laugh it up a lot. We have some, we every year around fantasy football season, we do a fantasy energy draft with NFL cool. music. So we really try to have a good time. You'll learn a lot. And then my website is just timechols.com, TIMECHOLS.com. You can send me a note from the website or just send a note to tim@timechols.com.
Oh, that's fantastic. Tim, this has been a phenomenal conversation. You have shared some really insightful things. Again, it's from a fresh perspective outside of the Bitcoin mining industry for me and my audience. So I really appreciate all of this. And yeah, I hope to get out to Georgia, and hopefully I can take you out to lunch in person, and maybe we can go take a look at some of the facilities that you guys have. I wish I could be there for the ribbon cutting on the new nuclear facility. That's a really special thing, and hopefully everybody there appreciates it just as much. So thank you, Tim, and you take care.
Thanks a lot.